I built an automation in Jira that handles client onboarding from start to finish with zero human interaction. But it gets even better than that. You already know that Jira can create tasks, set priorities, and assign work automatically. But this takes it to a whole other level. It creates the client Jira project, and then it generates a Confluence document from a template, all with client details embedded automatically within Jira and Confluence. Zero manual setup, no missing information, and 100% automated. Let me show you exactly how it works and how you could set it up for yourself. By the way, if you don't want to start from scratch and want a quick head start on this automation, feel free to check in the description below, and I'm going to leave the actual automation link down there. So this automation gets kicked off in our CRM, and in this case, we're using Adio, but you could use any CRM that you'd like. We're just sending a webhook to Jira with relevant information. So I have Grid here, who is a potential client, and let's say that they sign the contract. I'll go ahead and grab them and move them over to one. Once they're in this column, we have some webhooks that are sent out and a few automations that kick off within Jira. So that automation just ran, and we could see a new project here created for Grid. And if I jump in here, we have a few tasks that are assigned to our team and ready to be worked on. So this is all part of our client onboarding, and all of these tasks are associated with our full process to help get a client onboarded with us. So there's a couple of things that happen during this process of the project being created. Now jumping over to our Confluence space, if I look on the sidebar here, I have a new client for Grid. And if I open this up, I could see that the company name, the website, primary contacts, and email. I just added Whitney in this case from our team as an example. And all that information is embedded directly into our Confluence template, as well as our project that we just created, which links back to our Jira project that we just looked at. So the Jira and the Confluence projects are 100% automated, and they're all coming from this automation here. So the very first thing that we have is the webhook, and this is just sending relevant information from Adio, our CRM, to Jira. Once that webhook kicks off, we have a few variables that are added here, things like company name, start date, primary contacts, and so on. Once those variables are defined, we're using them through the rest of the automation. So we're adding another GET request here, and essentially what this one is doing is validating whether or not the name is available. So it's going to go through your Jira projects and find the name and compare it to the company name that we have in Adio, since the company name is what we use to name our client projects. And if there's a duplicate, what we're doing is just sending a Slack message to ourselves. If you're using Jira for this part, you could also just add a comment on the Jira ticket. So if it is already taken, we just have a response that says, hey, just feel free to grab the project from the archives. Otherwise, it's going to send another request to Jira. And in this case, what we're going to be doing is creating a project key. So before we can create the project itself, we're going to be generating a project key. And then once we do that, we could go ahead and actually create the project. So this post request is going to be sent out and create the project itself. We're going to be adding the project key as a variable once that is created. We'll be using this later in the automation as well. And then we're going to send another Slack message, which is just saying the project is created with the project URL available within Slack directly. A quick delay, and then we're creating a few tasks and subtasks as you saw within Jira earlier. And then from there, we're creating the Confluence spaces and getting Confluence information. So the first step for Confluence is to create a page that is essentially just going to be a template. So we have a template set up that we're using, and then we're pulling that template and recreating it with all the subpages within Confluence. Then we're delaying that action because we need it to cache and actually be able to show up before we can pull a GET request. With the GET request, what we're doing is getting the information of the actual page that was created, and then we're we're creating a variable for the page ID once we do a GET, and then we're going to send another web request. And what this one is going to do, and it's a little bit weird here, but we're going to actually change just the page title, because before we could use our smart values within our body or custom data in our put request, we have to change the page ID and have some caching happen within the Confluence page before we could use those smart values. So once we change the title, we go ahead and do the full put request with all of the custom data that we have that's being pulled in from Adio and then added to our Confluence page directly. So before I walk you through exactly how this automation is built, let's talk about why it even matters. Most of these kinds of setups are a very manual process, and that brings up three primary issues. Number one is that projects are created inconsistently, whether that's certain project permissions, project owners, or other relevant details within the project. This automation makes it identical every single time a new project is created. Number two is that teams aren't notified correctly. So anytime a new project is created, whether it's the fault of the individual who's creating the project or they just don't have time to respond, they don't actually get the relevant information out there quick enough when a project is ready to go. And number three is that important onboarding steps often get missed. One primary example for us was when we were winning new deals and creating the Confluence page. Oftentimes we wouldn't pull over all of the information that was needed from our CRM into our Confluence page. This automation helps solve all of that and helps our team save at least 2 to 3 hours every single time we onboard a new client. And every single step happens automatically the moment that we win a new deal, and we don't have to wait for someone to free up to be able to create those projects and Confluence pages manually, sometimes taking a day or longer for the onboarding to actually kick off. Okay, now let's jump in and go over how you can set up this automation in your Jira environment. So for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to be using our sales pipeline, and we'll just use this to trigger the automation. And believe it or not, this is actually what we used at grid.io as our CRM for quite a while before moving to Adio. And if you're interested in seeing how Jira can be used as a CRM with data enrichment and pretty much all the CRM features that you can want for a very basic setup, feel free to drop a comment down below and we might just make a video about it. So in this case, we'll be using the sales pipeline as an example, and I'll use Vandelay Industries as our prime example here when we're going to be winning a deal. So we're going to be triggering from this board. So the first thing what I need to do is actually create the automation. So I'll go to my settings on the top right, click on System, click on Global Automation, and then I'll create a new rule here. And we're going to be triggering this not from a webhook since we're not using an external CRM, so that makes it a little bit simpler for us. But we are going to be triggering on a issue transition, and specifically when we go to closed won. So I'll find my closed won status. It could be from anywhere. So sometimes we close deals from meetings, sometimes it's during qualification. Sometimes it happens at various stages. So we don't really need to specify from which status, just the to status. And then we want to add one more condition here for a project. That way we make sure that we're not actually triggering this from other projects just in case. So project equals sales pipeline. And now we're only going to be triggering this on the sales pipeline project when something is moved to close won. Great, our trigger's ready to go and our condition is set. Now we could work on creating some variables. So I'll go ahead and create the variables first. I'll keep this very simple and just create one variable for let's just use the company name, which is the issue summary in this case. So I'll create the issue summary as a variable, issue.summary. And if you're confused about these smart values, all you have to do is click on this little button here. And this brings you to a list of smart values here in Jira. And then if you want to find them, I could just search for summary, and then there's summary, issue summary here. There's issue summary changelog, epic parent, all the smart values you would like, or you could use ChatGPT. That's what I use pretty often as well. So we're going to be creating a variable for issue summary, which is just company name in this case. So I'll give this a variable name of company name, just to keep things really simple and easy for us to reference later. Once we have the variable ready, the very first thing we need to do is make sure that our project is still available within our Jira environment. The project name itself. So what we're gonna do is send a webhook request here. And this one is gonna be a GET request. So we're essentially gonna be getting the project names and comparing them to the company name within our Jira environment to make sure that there is no overlap. And if there is, we're not going to be creating the project since it's not going to work anyway. So what we're going to want to do here is add this webhook URL. And this webhook URL is essentially pulling our instance URL, and then it's adding the REST API, it's validating an object, validating the project name, and then it's comparing the project name to our company name .url encode. So essentially all it's doing is, again, pulling a list of our project names from Jira, comparing that to our company name that we're going to be closing, and seeing if there are any duplicates. That's all we really need here, and we're going to want to delay the execution of this before any next rules run. And then we're not going to be running we're not continuing any of these rules if the event is not successful. We want the automation to stop in this case. or we could set this to continue, and then we could also add a comment if we wanted to. So in our project, in this case, I could add an if condition. So I'll add an if condition here, smart value, and in here I will add company name, the one I just created. And then in this company name, if the condition equals, I believe it was, or does not equal response body. So we don't want it to equal the web response dot body. And then as long as it doesn't equal this, what we're going to do is add a message to the ticket. So I'll add another, this should be an if condition or else. So let me add that here, if else condition, there we go. And that should be in here. So that condition of smart value should be right here. I'll just copy and paste that because we do need an else condition here as well. So I'll grab the second value, does not equal this value here. I could delete this. So as long as this company name does not equal the web response body, we could go ahead and post a message or a comment on the original ticket. And in here, we could say that, hey, the company name in Jira is already taken, or something similar. I like to make these a little bit fun sometimes, but for the purposes of this demo, I'll just keep things very simple. So if that's the case, we're not going to be continuing the automation, and we'll end it right there. And then we'll just add an else condition here. And in here, anything else other than that, we can continue the automation as needed. So in here, we're going to be adding another GET request. So we'll send another webhook here. So we've already created or we've already compared the actual webhooks here. And one thing to keep in mind when creating these webhooks is that you will need authorization and you sometimes also need headers as well. That way, or sorry, not the headers, you actually need the content type. So you'll need essentially you'll need your authorization token for Jira, which you could go to your icon on the top right, go to your profile, and then go to security settings or security tab, and then generate a new token. And then your header is going to essentially be authorization, and then your value is going to be basic space your key. So it's as simple as that to set up your actual headers. And then again, for GET requests, we don't need any kind of content types, but this content type, the application JSON, is going to be needed when we do any kind of post or put requests. So going back to our send web request, we're going to be doing another GET request here. So I'll set this to GET. And in this case, what we're going to be doing is creating the issue key. So we can't create a project without an issue key. And what we need to do is generate an issue key in order to use here. So we can't just preset this, or we can preset this on the ticket in this case if we wanted to. So if in this case this was for grid, I might add an issue key, just a regular field or custom field of issue key, and then just manually input that, and then maybe add a condition before it moves into one. That issue key field has to be set. But I like to do this just because it's fully automated and requires essentially no manual input. But what we're doing here is essentially the same thing. But in this case, what we're doing is splitting the issue summary. We're finding certain letters and then replacing letters and numbers to essentially create our issue key. It's a little bit complicated, but feel free to use ChatGPT to find the best webhook URL and test this out to see how well it works, and then use that for your own projects. Once this project key is created, what we'll want to do after this is send another request. So this is going to be a post request this time. So we'll send another webhook request, post request, and in this case, we're actually just creating the project. So I'll add the URL here, and it's just going to be our API and then project, very simple. And then we're going to add custom data. And in this case, don't forget about your content type application JSON as well as your authentication. That's going to be required before you can create these projects. And then we're going to be adding some custom data here. And in this custom data, here's what I have. It doesn't have to be all of this information, but there are a few key items to keep in mind that are required. So key is required. That's going to be our web response body. That's what we generated right here. So we're adding that key here. Then we're going to be adding a name, which we're just pulling in the company name, which we already validated is available. Account lead, you could find this in your users. Just go to your settings, user management, and then find the user that you want to set as the lead. And then in the URL tab, you'll be able to find this little key here, and that'll set that individual as the account lead in the settings. Assignee type, project lead. Notification scheme, you could pull in a default notification scheme here. This is also a required field, so you'll need to go into your notifications and just, again, find in the URL your notification scheme to apply here. Project type, workflow scheme, kind of same thing as notification scheme. Issue type, screen scheme, issue type scheme, category ID. These are all going to help us standardize all of our client projects. So for example, we have grid here, but if we have another client, we're just standardizing all of our workflows, all of our screen schemes, issue types, everything else is standardized across all client projects. So this helps us keep the standardization across the board anytime a new project is created. So feel free to use this information. And then there's a lot of documentation on what is and isn't needed and what can be added when a new project is created in Jira. So we've now created our project, and we're going to add a quick variable here to make sure that we store the project key. And that's going to be as simple as adding the web response body. So web response.body.key. And I'm just going to name this new project key. That way it's easy for me to reference and use later in the automation. So now that that's done, we could add another message and say that the project has been successfully created. So we could add another comment here. Comment on the issue, hey, project is created. Feel free to add the project URL here. That way it's easier to find inside of the comments. But get as fancy as you'd like here. We use Slack messages. You can do that as well just by adding a Slack message instead. But totally up to you here, depending on how you want to set up. So next, we're going to delay this by just 5 seconds. That way we make sure that there is enough time. And it looks like I don't actually have delays here. Well, I'll skip the delay for now, but I usually like to add a delay here just to make sure that the projects are ready, everything is cached, and good to go before I move on to create the tasks. In which case, tasks are relatively simple and easy to do. We'll just add another item here for task. So we'll create an issue, and then we'll make sure that this issue is created on I believe is the most recent project, or the project should actually just be a smart value. That would probably keep it very consistent for you. So I'll add a project smart value here of web response, and then I'll add .body.id. And this will pull in the new projects that we just created. That way we make sure we have the correct project every time. If you use most recent project here, it doesn't always work because you're actually sending a webhook request and not creating a project within native automation. So Jira doesn't really know which most recent project you created. So you'll want to use the smart value to make sure that it's consistent every time. We'll set an issue type here. I just use task, but feel free to use whatever you'd like. And then specify a summary and a description, any other fields that you'd like, and your task is good to go, and it'll be auto-generated the moment your project is created. All right, so once that's done, if you wanted to add more subtasks here, you could do that. Other tasks, we have a few things that kick off here, but we'll just leave it at the one task for now to keep things simple. So our project is now set up, and everything Jira related is now pulled over. The next step is to integrate our Confluence and Confluence pages. So this is where it gets a little bit complex. And if you need any help setting this up, or if you want us to do it on your behalf and for your organization, feel free to reach out to us. It's going to be the first link in the description down below to schedule a free consultation with us. We'd be more than happy to do this with you, but this part does get a little bit complex. So if you are looking to set up some kind of Confluence documents or auto-create those documents based on templates, either be very tech savvy in this case, or it might take a little bit of time for you to figure this out, or feel free to reach out to us directly. But I will say that it does get a little bit weird here, the way that we have to set up these webhooks for Confluence to work. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do here is we're going to be pulling in a post request. And in this post request, let me see here. So what we're going to be doing, so I'll add a new webhook here, just like we did with Jira. And then we're going to be adding this URL. So this is going to be slightly different for Confluence since it's not within Jira. So we're pulling in a page ID, which a page ID you could just find in your URL. And what we're going to be doing here is copying that page over with all of its structure and hierarchy. So I'm pulling over this template here that I have. So whatever template you have built out, all you have to do is replace this number line here with whatever number you have for your page ID. This is going to be a post request with custom data, and then we're going to want to delay the execution of this as well. So here's the data that I'm using, and I'll kind of go over these items to explain what they do. So copy attachments is just copying over attachments from the page. Permissions, I'm saving that as well because we have specific permission sets on our projects. Properties is true, labels is true, custom content is true, descendants is true. That's going to be our page hierarchy if you have child pages. Destination page ID, title options. This is going to be adding all of our titles and replacing our titles. So inside of Confluence, what we have is template as our prefix. So we have template and then project name, and then we have template documents. We have template. We also have template meetings. So template is essentially being replaced. So we're replacing the search term of template with company name, which is a value or a variable that we created earlier in this automation. And we're essentially replacing the word template with company name. That way we remove that word and replace it with grid meetings, with grid documents, with just grid. So that way we don't have template in the name, and we retain all of the same page names that we typically create either way. So that's our custom data that we're sending over. And in here, we'll need to do the same thing of authorization and content type. Other than that, you should be good to go. With the authorization, what you could do is just copy over exactly what you had in the Jira post requests. It's going to be the same exact information that works for Confluence as long as you have those permissions. Okay, once we have that, again, make sure you delay the executions because it will not work otherwise. So the next thing to do after this is to add a GET request. So this one's going to be another webhook, and this time we're going to be pulling the page information. So I'll add a URL here, and this URL is essentially going to be pulling the title, company name, and then inside of our space key, you'll need to make sure that your space key is set here. And then this company name here is going to be again, pulling our variable here that we created earlier, and all we're doing is finding the page that we just created to pull in the page ID and other relevant info. So we'll set our authorization here. Content type shouldn't really matter too much, but we'll pull this page ID, and then what we'll do after this is we'll create a variable for that page ID. So what we're going to do here is add web response, and then .body, and then .results, .id. So what we're doing here is just pulling the page ID and creating a variable for it, and I'll call this page ID. That way we could reference this in our next webhook post request to the Confluence page. So we'll add that here, then we'll add our page ID, and then we'll add a variable for it. And then what we're going to do next is add a put request. And this is essentially when we're going to be updating the information inside of our Confluence page. So another webhook here, and this one is once again going to be a put, and we're going to be adding a URL here. And then I'll add this URL, and all we're doing is grabbing that page ID. That way we can reference that page ID and make updates to it now that it's created. So we're going to add custom data here, and then again, we'll make sure we'll delay this for the next automation, and we'll add our authentication here. So for this first put request, what I'm doing is just changing the page title. Now, the reason we have to change the page title is because there's some caching that happens on the back end of Confluence, and unfortunately, we can't use smart values. I've tried every possible way I could to work around this, but until we make this change or until we go to the page and visit it manually, this next automation that I'll show you will not actually run. So all we're doing here is pulling in the version number, which is going to be version number 2. Because this page was just created, it was version number 1. We're calling it version number 2. We're going to give it a temp name, and then the type is going to be page. And all we're doing is changing the title of the page itself. So once we change that title, that'll give us the ability to cache the page and make sure that everything's ready for us to pull in smart values that we've created previously within this automation and add those to certain sections of our Confluence document. So all I'm going to do is copy this one here. And instead of, essentially there's nothing here to change except for the custom data. And here's a quick sample of custom data that I normally add within my Confluence documents. So this is essentially going to be a GET request I have of my own template. So our template is going to be very specific to us. We have our own fields, our own information within our page. So what I would recommend doing is for this GET request here, this first GET request, that's a post, that's a post. I think one of these was supposed to be GET. Sorry, this one was supposed to be a post request. There should be a GET request. I think I am missing a GET request here somewhere. This one is supposed to be GET request. Okay, so this is going to be our GET request. And what I would do here is just log really quickly the action of webhook or web response. And I think it was just .body. And what that's going to do is just give us the entire, let me get that smart value correct. So we're just logging the entire web response value, which is going to look something like this. And then once you have this web response value, essentially all we're going to do is add information to it. So normally you'll see either spaces or blank and empty items. So what I'm doing here, and if I search for company name, all I'm doing is pulling in these smart values. So I have a little table within my Confluence document that has things like company name, primary contact, and other fields. So all I'm doing is reusing this template that I pulled from my GET request, and then just giving it a company name here and just using my smart value that we created earlier. And again, depending on which smart values you have earlier in your automation, you could use others as well. I have primary contact here. I have a few others with primary email, primary communication method is one I have. So whatever variables you create originally and you're pulling from your CRM, you could end up using within this Confluence page. And again, to keep things simple, I'm just using company name here, but this can get as complex as you would like. So once we change that name, we cached everything. Then we're going to be doing this GET request, and we're going to be adding this as version 3. And we're going to be giving this a title of company name. So we're actually changing it again. And then we're adding the body and storage. And this is, again, everything that I pulled from this GET request, which is going to be from this web response body. So what I would do is run this automation first without adding any of this below, pull that GET request body, and then put that GET request body into the custom data. That way you have exactly what you need within your Confluence page. So that's pretty much it. And you could tweak and change this as much as you'd like. We have different things like different tasks being created after the Jira project is created. I oftentimes come in here and actually tweak the Confluence page itself. So if we change things within our Confluence page template, I'll go in and pull another GET request and make those updates as needed. So I go through and make changes to this every once in a while just to make sure everything's up to date and looks good. But once you have this dialed in and set, you pretty much don't worry about anything. It just runs every single time you have a new client onboarding. We have a very similar to flow to offboarding as well. So we actually pull in all of our tasks and processes for offboarding and let all of that run whenever we are ready to offboard a client. And yes, I know that this process can be complex and very frustrating to set up. It took me hours just to get this first initial automation running without any errors. So feel free to reach out to our team at any point if you wanted us to help set this up for you. It's going to be the first link in the description below if you wanted to book a free consultation with us. So why did we build this automation in the first place? So number one, as I already mentioned, it is a huge time saver for us and saves us at least 3 to 4 hours every single time a new onboarding is kicked off. And number two is the error reduction. We just see far less errors with information getting pulled from our CRM and other various sources into Jira and Confluence. And number three, it's just a far more robust process. So even the manual steps that we have here, we're creating as tasks in our Jira environment, and it just makes this process so much easier to follow and helps us to make sure that everything is accounted for. So that's how we fully automate our client onboarding in Jira. And again, if you want this automation, feel free to check the link in the description. You could download this automation and upload it to your own Jira environment and make tweaks to it as you go. If you find this useful, hit the like button and subscribe. If you have any questions at all, feel free to drop them in the comments below. I'm going to do my best to answer every single one of them. See you in the next one.